James Corden sat in his dressing room, looking at himself in the mirror. He fixed his hair and smiled at his reflection. Things were going very well for him these days. His late-night show was getting more and more popular. More people watched it every month. The big bosses at the TV network were happy with him. His team was excited about the future. And James himself felt like he could do no wrong. The room around him was comfortable, but not too fancy. Photos of James with famous people lined the walls. A small couch sat in the corner where guests could wait before going on air. A coffee machine bubbled in the background, filling the room with a rich smell. This had been his home away from home for years now, and he loved every inch of it. James checked his watch. It was Tuesday evening, about 2 hours before the show would start. He had already gone through the guest list for tonight: a popular actress promoting her new movie and a rock band that had just released an album. A pretty normal show, but James would make it special. He always did. There was a quick knock at the door, and Nancy Miller rushed in without waiting for an answer. Nancy was one of the show's production assistants. She had been working with James for about 3 years now. She was good at her job, quick, smart, and able to solve problems before they got too big. Her blonde hair was a bit messy today, like she had been running through the building. "James, James!" Nancy was breathing hard, trying to catch her breath. Her eyes were wide with excitement. "You won't believe who just confirmed for Thursday's show." James turned away from the mirror. He raised an eyebrow, curious about what had Nancy so worked up. "Who is it? The president? The Queen of England?" he joked. Nancy shook her head. "Even better for ratings. It's Clint Eastwood." James's mouth fell open. "Clint Eastwood? Are you serious?" "The Clint Eastwood?" Nancy nodded fast. "Yes. His new movie is coming out next week. You know, that Western drama everyone's talking about. His publicist called just 5 minutes ago. They were supposed to go on The Tonight Show, but there was a scheduling problem. So now he's coming here." James stood up from his chair. Clint Eastwood was a true Hollywood legend. He had been famous for over 60 years, first as an actor in westerns and action movies, then as an award-winning director. Getting him on the show was a very big deal. Guests like that could boost ratings for weeks. "That's amazing news," James said, but then a strange look crossed his face. It was a look Nancy had seen before, half smile, half something else, something that sometimes led to trouble. "What are you thinking?" Nancy asked, suddenly a little worried. "I'm thinking this is a huge opportunity," James said, walking around his dressing room. "Clint Eastwood is an icon. But he's also—" James paused, searching for the right words. "He's also what?" Nancy asked. "He's also known for being very serious, very tough, very ... Clint Eastwood." James was now grinning fully. "Don't you think it would be funny if we played with that image a bit?" Before Nancy could answer, there was another knock at the door. Alan Jones walked in carrying a stack of papers. Alan was one of the show's main producers. He was older than James by about 10 years, with gray starting to show in his dark hair. He had been in television for a long time and had seen many hosts come and go. He was good at keeping James grounded when his ideas got too wild. "I heard the news about Eastwood," Alan said, putting the papers down on a small table. "It's a great get for the show." "Isn't it?" James said, still pacing the room. "And I was just telling Nancy that we should do something special with him. Something the audience won't expect." Alan's face changed slightly. A small line appeared between his eyebrows. "What kind of special thing are you thinking about?" "You know, a bit of fun. Maybe I could do an impression of him. Or make some jokes about his tough guy image. The audience would love it." James was getting more excited as he talked. Alan put his hands in his pockets. "I don't know, James. Eastwood is not exactly known for his sense of humor about himself. He's old school, dignified. He might not appreciate being the butt of jokes." "That's Exactly what will make it funny, James insisted. The contrast. Everyone does respectful interviews with Clint Eastwood. We'll do something different. Something people will talk about. Nancy looked between the two men. She had been with the show long enough to know when James got an idea in his head, it was hard to change his mind. But she also trusted Alan's judgment. Maybe we should play it safe with someone like Mr. Eastwood, she suggested gently. James waved his hand in the air, as if shooing away their concerns. Trust me, it will be great television. The audience will love it. Alan opened his mouth to say something else, but was interrupted by another knock at the door. It was Bill Peters, the head of the camera crew, telling James they needed him for a lighting check on stage. We'll talk more about this later, James said, heading for the door. But start thinking about funny Eastwood bits. I want this to be memorable. After James left, Nancy and Alan stayed in the dressing room. They looked at each other with concern. He's going to do something stupid, isn't he? Nancy asked. Alan sighed. Probably. You know how he gets when he thinks he has a brilliant idea. And he's been taking more risks lately because the ratings are so good. Should we talk to the network? Nancy suggested. Alan shook his head. They won't step in unless they think he's going to do something truly terrible. And making fun of a guest isn't terrible in their eyes. It's just potentially awkward. Nancy sat down on the couch. Clint Eastwood is a living legend. My dad loves his movies. He's been famous since before any of us were born. Exactly, Alan said. And he's seen young hotshots come and go for decades. If James pushes too far. He didn't finish the sentence. The rest of Tuesday evening went by in a blur of activity. The show that night went very well. The actress was funny and charming. The band played a great set. James was in top form, making the audience laugh again and again. As everyone was leaving, James seemed even more energized than usual. See? He said to Alan as they watched the audience file out. When I'm on, and Thursday is going to be even better. Alan just nodded, but he didn't share James's confidence. He had been in television long enough to know that sometimes the biggest opportunities could turn into the biggest disasters. And something told him that Clint Eastwood was not a man who would enjoy being mocked, even in the name of entertainment. As James headed back to his dressing room, humming happily to himself, Alan watched him go. The young host had no idea what he was getting himself into. By Thursday night, Alan thought, James Corden might learn a very public lesson about respect. And millions of people would be watching when it happened. The next day, James arrived at the studio earlier than usual. He had not slept much. His mind was too busy thinking about Thursday's show with Clint Eastwood. As he walked through the hallways, people greeted him with smiles and waves. Everyone had heard the news about the famous guest. It was all anyone could talk about. James went straight to his office instead of his dressing room. He sat at his desk and pulled out a notebook. He began writing down ideas for jokes about Clint Eastwood. He thought about the actor's famous squint, his tough guy roles, his talks with empty chairs, and his age. James laughed to himself as he wrote. He was sure these jokes would be a hit with the audience. The Wednesday show went very well that night. James was full of energy. He seemed to bounce across the stage. His jokes were sharper and funnier than usual. The audience laughed and clapped more than they had in weeks. As the show ended and the audience left, James felt on top of the world. Did you see that? He asked Alan, who was standing near the stage. They loved every minute of it. Alan nodded. It was a good show. Good? It was great. James looked at his watch. I want a writers' meeting. Now we need to plan for tomorrow. Alan frowned. It's almost midnight, James. Most of the writers have gone home. Call them back, James insisted. This is important. Eastwood is the biggest guest we've had in months. Maybe years. I want everything to be perfect. Alan sighed, but did as James asked. Within an hour, 5 tired-looking writers sat around the large table in the conference room. There was Susan Green, the head writer who had been with James since the show started. Next to her was Paul White, a comedy veteran who had worked on 3 other late-night shows before this one. Karen Davis sat across from them, yawning but trying to hide it. She specialized in political humor, but was good at all kinds of jokes. Then there was Eric Thompson, the newest member of the team. He was young and eager to prove himself. Finally, Mary Lopez sat at the end of the table, quietly taking notes as she always did. James stood at the head of the table, too excited to sit down. Thank you all for staying late. As you know, tomorrow we have Clint Eastwood on the show. The writers nodded. Everyone knew this already. I want to do something special, James continued. Something people will remember. Not just another boring interview where we talk about his new movie and how great it is to work with so-and-so. Susan looked concerned. She had been in the business long enough to know when a host was about to take a risk. What did you have in mind, James? James grinned. I'm thinking we start with a bit where I pretend to be Eastwood. You know, make fun of his tough guy image a little bit. His squint. His growly voice. Then when he comes out, it will be this. Great contrast. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Susan spoke up. James Clint Eastwood is a legend. He's been in the business for over 60 years. He's won Academy Awards. People respect him a lot. I know that, James said. That's what makes it funny. No one makes fun of Clint Eastwood. Eric, wanting to impress his boss, jumped in. What if we did a parody of Dirty Harry? But instead of a gun, you could have something silly. Like a water pistol, or a banana. James pointed at Eric. Yes. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Or what if I do his Make My Day line, but about something silly? Like, go ahead, make my decaf, or something like that. Paul frowned. I don't know, James. Eastwood is from a different generation. They didn't grow up with roasts and parody like people do now. He might not find it funny to be mocked. It's not mocking, James insisted. It's in homage. It's showing that he's so famous, so iconic, that everyone knows his mannerisms. It's a compliment, really. Corden, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. Maybe we could run the idea by his publicist. First, just to make sure he's okay with this kind of humor. James shook his head. No, that would ruin the surprise. And his publicist would probably say no anyway. They're always so careful. But trust me, once he sees the audience reaction, he'll love it. The writers exchanged looks. None of them seemed convinced, but James was their boss. And when he got excited about an idea, it was hard to talk him out of it. Okay, Susan said finally. If you're set on this, let's at least make sure the jokes are good-natured. Nothing too mean or personal. For the next 2 hours, they worked on the opening bit for Thursday's show. James would come out and do a 3-minute monologue as Clint Eastwood. He would squint, speak in a low, gravelly voice, and say things like, "In my day, talk show hosts didn't dance, and I've killed men for talking more than you do." The writers tried to keep the jokes light, focusing on Eastwood's famous movie roles rather than anything too personal. As they worked, Alan stood in the corner, watching with a worried expression. He had been in television long enough to know when something might backfire. And this felt like it could be a disaster. By 2 a.m., they had a script. James was pleased with it. This is going to be amazing, he said, gathering his papers. The audience will love it. Eastwood will appreciate the tribute, and it will go viral. Win, win, win. The writers gathered their things and headed home for a few hours of sleep before coming back to prepare for Thursday's show. As they left, Susan pulled Alan aside. Do you think we should try to talk him out of this? She asked quietly. Alan shook his head. I already tried. You know how he gets when he thinks he has a brilliant idea. All we can do now is damage control if things go wrong. And how likely do you think that is? Susan asked. Alan looked at her seriously. Clint Eastwood has been in Hollywood since the 1950s. He's seen it all. He's worked with the best and the worst. He's directed Oscar-winning films. And from everything I've heard, he's not a man who enjoys being the butt of jokes. Susan sighed. So pretty likely then. Let's just say I'll be standing by with a fire extinguisher. Alan replied. Thursday morning came too quickly for the tired writers. They gathered at the studio to finalize the script and prepare for rehearsal. James arrived looking fresh and excited, as if he hadn't been up until 2 a.m. Today's the day. He announced to everyone, "Is my Eastwood impression ready?" The costume department had prepared a poncho similar to the one Eastwood wore in his spaghetti western movies. The prop department had a fake cigar and a cowboy hat. James tried everything on, practicing his squint in the mirror. "What do you think?" he asked Eric, who happened to be passing by. "You look just like him," Eric said, not entirely convincingly. James didn't notice the hesitation. He was too caught up in his own excitement. "This is going to be the best show ever," he said, adjusting the poncho. "After tonight, everyone will be talking about James Corden and Clint Eastwood." Eric nodded and walked away, wondering if he should update his resume, just in case. Thursday afternoon came quickly. The studio was busier than usual. Everyone moved faster, talked louder, and seemed more nervous. A visit from someone like Clint Eastwood did not happen every day. He was not just a star. He was Hollywood history. Walking on 2 legs in his dressing room, James practiced his Clint Eastwood impression in front of the mirror. He squinted his eyes, made his voice rough and low, and tried to look tough. He had watched several Eastwood movies the night before to get the details right. "Go ahead, make my day," James growled at his reflection. Then he laughed and tried again. "Do you feel lucky, punk?" "Well, do you?" There was a knock at the door. Lisa Brown, the show's makeup artist, came in with her tools. "Time to get you ready," she said. Lisa had been doing makeup for television for over 20 years. She had seen hosts come and go. Some became stars. Some disappeared. She had a good sense about these things. James sat down in the chair. "Make me look extra good today, Lisa. We have a big guest." "I know," Lisa said as she started to work on his face. "Everyone's talking about it. Clint Eastwood. That's really something." "Wait until you see what I have planned," James said with a smile. "I'm going to do this whole bit where I pretend to be him. It's going to be hilarious." Lisa's hand paused for a moment. "You're going to make fun of Clint Eastwood?" "To his face?" "Not make fun of him," James corrected. "Pay tribute to him. There's a difference." Lisa said, not sounding convinced. She had been around long enough to know the difference between a tribute and a roast. And she had a feeling James was planning something closer to the second. 1. Just be careful. Not everyone likes being the punchline. "It'll be fine," James said, waving away her concern. "Everyone has a sense of humor." "Not everyone has the same sense of humor," Lisa warned. But she could tell James wasn't really listening. He was too excited about his plan. As the afternoon went on, more people tried to warn James. Alan came by twice to suggest toning down the bit. Susan slipped him a note saying maybe they should cut the part about Eastwood's age. Even Nancy, who usually went along with James's ideas, seemed worried. But James wouldn't listen. He was sure his plan would work. The audience would laugh. Eastwood would be a good sport. The clip would go viral. Everything would be perfect. By 5 p.m., the audience was starting to arrive. The show would begin recording at 6:30. James peeked out at the crowd through a small gap in the curtain. The theater was filling up faster than usual. Word had gotten out about their special guest. "Biggest crowd we've had in months," James said. To Alan, who was standing nearby checking things on his clipboard. "They're here to see Eastwood," Alan reminded him. "They respect him, remember that. Yes, yes, James said. So do I. That's what will make the bit work. At 5:45, a black car pulled up outside the studio. Clint Eastwood had arrived. He was not alone. With him were two serious-looking men in suits, his agent and publicist, and a young woman who was his assistant. They were met by Nancy, who had been waiting at the door. "Mr. Eastwood, welcome to the show," Nancy said, trying to stay calm and professional despite her nerves. "We're so honored to have you with us," Clint Eastwood nodded. He was tall, still standing straight despite his age. His famous blue eyes looked at Nancy with a kind but serious expression. "Thank you for having me," he said in his quiet, gravelly voice, the real version of what James had been practicing all day. Nancy led the group to the green room, a comfortable waiting area where guests could relax before going on stage. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be fine," Eastwood said. He sat down on one of the couches. His team sat nearby. They were used to this routine. They had done hundreds of shows over the years. Nancy hurried to get the water. On her way, she passed James, who was now in costume for his opening bit. He had on the poncho, the cowboy hat, and was carrying a fake cigar. "Is he here?" James asked excitedly. "Yes, he just arrived," Nancy said. "He seems very dignified." "Perfect," James said. "That's his whole image. It'll make the contrast with my bit even funnier." Nancy wanted to say something else, to warn him one more time, but James was already hurrying away to finish getting ready. She sighed and continued on her mission to get water for their famous guest. At 6:25, the audience was fully seated. The energy in the room was electric. People whispered to each other, excited about seeing the Hollywood legend in person. The band was playing upbeat music to warm up the crowd. Backstage, final preparations were happening. Camera operators checked their equipment. Sound technicians adjusted levels. The stage manager gave last-minute instructions to everyone. In his final prep area just off stage, James was getting a last touch-up from Lisa. His Clint Eastwood costume was complete. He looked in a hand mirror and practiced his squint one more time. "Knock 'em dead," Lisa said, though her smile seemed forced. "Oh, I will," James replied confidently. At exactly 6:30, the stage manager counted down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The show's theme music played. The announcer's voice boomed through the theater. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Here's your host, James Corden." The audience cheered and clapped as James bounded onto the stage, full of energy as always. He waved to the crowd, soaking in their excitement. "Thank you. Thank you so much." James waited for the audience to quiet down. "We have an amazing show for you tonight. Simply amazing. Our musical guest is the incredible pop star Zoe Hall." The audience cheered again. And James continued, building up the moment. "We have a true Hollywood legend in the building tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Clint Eastwood is here." The audience erupted in applause and cheers. Some people even stood up. This was a bigger reaction than James had seen in a long time. It confirmed what he already believed. This was going to be a special night. "Now, before we bring him out," James said, "I thought it would be fun to give you my impression of the great man himself." Without waiting for the audience's reaction, James turned his back to them. When he turned around again, he had transformed. His eyes were squinted nearly shut. His mouth was turned down in a hard line. He had the fake cigar clenched between his teeth. He looked, in his mind at least, exactly like Clint Eastwood. "You know," James said in a gravelly voice that was much deeper than his normal speaking voice, "in my day, talk show hosts didn't dance around like idiots. They sat behind their desks like real men." There was some laughter from the audience, but not as much as James had expected. He continued with his impression. "I've been in Hollywood longer than this kid has been alive. I was making movies while His parents were still in diapers. More scattered laughter, and now a few uncomfortable looks being exchanged in the audience. James didn't notice. He was too caught up in his performance. You know what I say to people who don't like my movies? He paused for effect. Go ahead, make my day. Change the channel, I don't care. I'm Clint Eastwood. I'll just squint at you until you feel bad. From the side of the stage, Alan was making frantic cutting motions, trying to get James to wrap it up. But James was on a roll now. And don't even get me started on politics, James continued in his Eastwood voice. I'm so old. I once had an argument with an empty chair, and the chair won. This joke, referring to a famous incident where Eastwood had talked to an empty chair representing President Obama at a political convention, fell completely flat. The audience was now almost silent. A few people coughed. Someone whispered, "This is awkward." What James didn't know was that Clint Eastwood himself was standing just off stage, watching the entire performance. He had arrived there just as James began his impression. His face showed no emotion as he watched, but his eyes never left James. Next to him, his publicist was whispering urgently into his phone, clearly not happy with what was happening. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, but was actually only about 4 minutes, James wrapped up his impression. Anyway, that's enough of that. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the real deal, the legend himself, Mr. Clint Eastwood. The audience, perhaps relieved that the uncomfortable bit was over, applauded loudly as Clint Eastwood walked onto the stage. He moved with the careful dignity of his age, but there was still power in his walk, still the presence that had made him a star for over half a century. As Eastwood approached, James extended his hand, still smiling widely, still thinking. His bit had been a success. Mr. Eastwood, it's such an honor to have you here. Clint Eastwood looked at James's hand for a moment that seemed to stretch forever. Then slowly, he reached out and shook it. His grip was firm. His face remained serious. And in that moment, as millions watched, James began to realize he might have made a terrible mistake. The audience clapped as Clint Eastwood sat down in the guest chair. James took his seat behind his desk, still wearing a smile, though it now seemed a bit forced. Something felt wrong. The air in the studio seemed heavy, like before a storm. James cleared his throat. Well, Mr. Eastwood, it's truly an honor to have you here with us tonight. I'm a huge fan of your work. Eastwood nodded slightly but said nothing. His blue eyes stayed fixed on James. They were clear and sharp, showing none of the fog that sometimes comes with age. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything and forgotten nothing. The silence stretched for a few seconds. James was not used to silence. His shows were always full of noise, laughter, and movement. He rushed to fill the quiet. So that was just a bit of fun there at the beginning. You know how we do things on this show. Always having a laugh, James said, his words coming out faster than usual. I noticed, Eastwood finally said. His voice was quiet but strong, like distant thunder. Everyone in the studio heard him clearly. James laughed nervously. I hope you weren't offended. It was meant as a tribute, really, because you're such an icon. Eastwood tilted his head slightly, as if considering James's words. An icon, he repeated. That's a big word. Well, you are, James said quickly. Your career spans what, 6 decades? That's incredible. From the westerns to Dirty Harry to your amazing work as a director. You've done it all. I've been lucky, Eastwood said simply. His face remained serious. He did not smile. The audience was very quiet now. People leaned forward in their seats. This was not going the way James's interviews usually went. His guests typically matched his energy, laughed at his jokes, and played along with his games. But Eastwood was different. He seemed to be following his own rules. Your new film looks fantastic, James said, trying to move to safer ground. It's called The Last Horizon, right? Can you tell us a bit about it? This was the kind of normal question that should have gotten things back on track. But before Eastwood could answer, he leaned forward slightly in his chair. "I'd be happy to talk about the film," he said. "But first, I'm curious about something, James." James swallowed hard. "What's that, Mr. Eastwood? Do you always mock your guests before they come out? Or am I getting special treatment tonight?" The studio went completely silent. Someone in the audience coughed nervously. The cameras caught every moment of James's face as the color drained from it. Millions of viewers at home watched as the normally confident host struggled to find words. It wasn't mocking," James stammered. "It was just, a bit of fun." "I see," Eastwood said. His voice remained calm, but there was something underneath it now. Not anger, exactly. More like disappointment. In my day, fun didn't usually involve making someone else the butt of jokes." James felt sweat forming on his forehead. This was going very badly. He looked desperately toward the side of the stage where Alan was standing. Alan's face was grim. There would be no help from that direction. "I'm truly sorry if it came across that way," James said, trying to sound sincere. "I'm a huge fan, as I said. I've admired your work my whole life." "Is that why you made fun of my age?" Eastwood asked. "And my politics? And that business with the chair? Because you admire me?" There was no anger in his voice, just a steady, relentless questioning that made James more uncomfortable with each word. This was Clint Eastwood, the director now, the man who had gotten Oscar-winning performances out of actors by pushing them to be honest. He was using those same skills on James. Live in front of millions. James fumbled for words. "It was just comedy, just jokes." "Jokes should be funny," Eastwood said simply. "And they work best when people laugh with you, not at you." The audience was so quiet now that you could hear the air conditioning humming. This was not entertainment anymore. It was a public lesson in respect, delivered by a master to a student who had not known he needed teaching. James looked down at his desk. His notes for the interview seemed useless now. The clever questions, the planned jokes, the games he had wanted to play, none of it would work. This was not going to be the fun viral clip he had imagined. This was turning into the most uncomfortable moment of his career. "You're right," James finally said, his voice quieter than before. "I didn't think about how it would feel from your perspective. That was wrong of me." Eastwood studied James for a long moment. The entire studio held its breath. Then, almost imperceptibly, Eastwood nodded. "Apology accepted," he said. "Now, did you want to talk about my film?" James let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. Yes, I would. Please tell us about The Last Horizon." Eastwood began to talk about his new movie. It was a Western, but with modern themes about family, loyalty, and finding purpose in a changing world. As he spoke, his voice became warmer, more engaged. This was something he cared about, something he was proud of. He had directed the film and played a small but important role in it. James listened carefully, asking good questions when Eastwood paused. The interview slowly found a better rhythm. It wasn't the joking, high-energy segment James usually did, but something different, a thoughtful conversation between two people who respected each other, or at least one who was learning to respect the other. The audience seemed to appreciate this new direction. They laughed at the right moments. When Eastwood told stories about making the film, they nodded when he talked about the themes that had drawn him to the project. They applauded when he mentioned the young actors he had worked with, saying they were the future of Hollywood. From the side of the stage, Alan watched with a mix of relief and surprise. This could have been a complete disaster. It still might be when the critics and social media got hold of it tomorrow. But somehow, James was finding his way back from the edge. And Eastwood, despite the rough start, was giving a better interview than most of their recent guests. As the segment reached its planned end time, James looked at his notes one last time. There was a game there, something silly involving cowboy hats and water guns that the writers had thought would be fun. James quietly closed the folder. That wasn't going to happen now. Mr. Eastwood, James said instead. Before we finish, I just want to say again what an honor it is to have you here. And I want to apologize once more for how we started. That wasn't right. Eastwood looked at James for a long moment. His face remained serious, but there was something else in his eyes now. Maybe a hint of respect for James's willingness to admit his mistake. You know what I've learned after all these years in Hollywood? Eastwood asked. What's that? James asked. It takes a strong man to admit when he's wrong, Eastwood said. A lot of people in this town never learn that lesson. The audience broke into applause. It wasn't the wild cheering that usually filled the studio, but something more meaningful, appreciation for a moment of genuine human connection. James nodded, accepting both the compliment and the lesson behind it. Thank you, Mr. Eastwood. I won't forget that. Call me Clint, Eastwood said. And then, for the first time since he had walked onto the stage, he smiled. It was a small smile, just a slight upward turn of his mouth, but it changed his whole face. Suddenly, he wasn't just a tough guy from the movies. He was a man who had lived a full life and learned what truly mattered along the way. Ladies and gentlemen, James said to the audience and the millions watching at home, Clint Eastwood. His new film, The Last Horizon, opens next Friday. The audience stood up, giving Eastwood a standing ovation as the show went to commercial break. As the cameras stopped rolling, James let out a long breath. He had survived, but just barely. And he had a feeling that tomorrow, when the clips of this interview hit the internet, he would be learning even more lessons about respect, humility, and the danger of trying to make fun of a legend. During the commercial break, James sat very still at his desk. His heart was beating fast. He could feel drops of sweat on his back. The audience was talking quietly among themselves. Many were looking at him. Some were on their phones, probably, already posting about what they had just seen. Alan walked quickly to James's side. We have 3 minutes until we're back on air, he said in a low voice. Are you okay? James nodded, though he didn't feel okay at all. That was not what I expected. You're lucky he didn't walk off the show, Alan said. We need to make the rest of this interview perfect. No more jokes about him. No games, just respectful questions about his work. I know, James said. He ran a hand through his hair. I really messed up, didn't I? Alan looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Yes, but he's giving you a second chance. Don't waste it. On the other side of the stage, Clint Eastwood was talking quietly with his publicist. The man was showing him something on a phone. Probably social media reactions already coming in about the interview. Eastwood listened, nodded, then handed the phone back. His face gave away nothing about what he was thinking. A stagehand with a headset approached James. 30 seconds until we're back, she said. James took a deep breath and straightened his tie. He had to fix this. He had to turn this disaster into something better. The red light on the camera turned on. They were live again. James smiled at the audience, then turned to Eastwood. Welcome back, James said. We're here with the legendary Clint Eastwood. He paused, then made a decision. Mr. Eastwood, Clint, before we continue, I want to say something. What I did at the beginning of our show tonight was disrespectful. You've had an amazing career spanning 6 decades. You've made films that have touched millions of people. You've won awards, created iconic characters, and told important stories as both an actor and a director. My attempt at humor didn't reflect the deep admiration I truly have for you and your work. The words were coming from a real place now. James wasn't just trying to save face. He meant what he was saying. The audience seemed to feel it too. They broke into spontaneous applause. Eastwood studied James for a long moment. His blue eyes seemed to look right through all the showbiz fakery, all the TV host charm, to the real person underneath. Finally he nodded. "I appreciate that," he said simply. "Not many people in this business are willing to admit when they're wrong." "Well, I was definitely wrong," James said with a small smile, "and I'm grateful for the chance to make it right. So instead of the silly games we had planned, I'd love to hear about your journey as a filmmaker. You started as an actor, but you've now directed over 30 films. How did that transition happen?" Eastwood seemed to relax slightly. This was a question about his work, about something he cared about. "It wasn't something I planned," he said. "I was working with some great directors, Don Siegel, Sergio Leone. I was watching, learning. Then one day in 1971, I was acting in this film called Play Misty for Me, and I thought, maybe I could direct this too. And the studio let you do both?" James asked, genuinely interested now. "It was a small film, low budget," Eastwood explained. "Less risk for them. But it did well, and that opened the door. After that, I tried to direct something every few years. I found I enjoyed telling the whole story, not just playing one part in it." The conversation continued like this for the next segment. James asked thoughtful questions about Eastwood's philosophy as a director, his approach to working with actors, and the kinds of stories he was drawn to. Eastwood, sensing the genuine interest, gave longer, more detailed answers. He even smiled a few times as he shared stories from his long career. The audience was completely engaged. This wasn't the wild, joke-filled show they were used to, but something different, a real conversation between two people who respected each other. Many in the audience had come expecting to laugh, but instead they were learning something. And they seemed to appreciate it. From the side of the stage, Alan watched with growing relief. The show was being saved. It wasn't the viral comedy moment James had hoped for, but it was turning into something perhaps more valuable, a memorable, authentic exchange that people would talk about for different reasons. As they neared the end of the final segment, James asked about advice for young filmmakers. "What would you tell someone just starting out in Hollywood today?" James asked. Eastwood thought for a moment. "Learn your craft," he said. "Be on time. Don't waste people's money or their trust. And tell stories that mean something to you. If they don't mean something to you, they won't mean anything to the audience." "That's great advice," James said. He hesitated, then asked one more question. "And what about for someone like me? Someone who sometimes gets caught up in getting laughs and forgets about respect?" Eastwood looked at James with those clear blue eyes. For a moment, the tough guy mask dropped completely, and there was just a wise, kind man who had seen it all. "We all make mistakes," he said. "The question is whether we learn from them. From what I've seen in the last half hour, you're learning fast." The audience broke into applause again. James felt something unexpected, a lump in his throat. He had come into this interview thinking it would be a funny bit, a chance to show off his comedy skills. Instead, it had turned into a lesson in humility and growth. "Ladies and gentlemen," James said as the applause died down, "Clint Eastwood. His film The Last Horizon opens next Friday, and I for one can't wait to see it." More applause as Eastwood nodded his thanks to the audience. The show's theme music began to play, signaling the end of the episode. "Thank you so much for being here," James said to Eastwood as the cameras prepared to cut away. "I truly am sorry about earlier." "Water under the bridge," Eastwood said. He leaned forward slightly. "You know what I always say on my film sets?" "What's that?" James asked. "Tomorrow is another day. We can always do better tomorrow." The show ended and the cameras stopped rolling. As the audience began to file out, many were talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. It hadn't been the usual James Corden show, but something more memorable. Backstage, James sat in his dressing room, still processing what had happened. There was a knock at the door, and Alan came in. "Well," Alan said, "that was certainly interesting." "That's one word for it," James replied. "How bad is it? Are people destroying me online?" Alan looked at his phone. "It's mixed. Some people are calling you disrespectful for the opening bit, but a lot more are impressed with how you handled it afterward. The apology is getting good reactions. People are saying it showed real growth. And Eastwood? What are they saying? About him? That he's a class act. That he taught you a lesson without being mean about it. That he's still the coolest guy in Hollywood at 94. James nodded. It could have been worse. Much worse. There was another knock at the door. Nancy poked her head in. "James? Mr. Eastwood is leaving, but he asked me to give you this." She handed James a small white envelope. James opened it and found a note written in a firm, clear hand. "James, good recovery tonight. We all slip. Sometimes. What matters is getting back up. If you're ever in my part of California, stop by the ranch. We can talk more about respect, comedy, and finding the right balance." James read the note twice, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. It was a small thing, just a few sentences. But coming from someone like Eastwood, it felt important. "I think I learned something tonight," James said to Alan and Nancy. "Maybe the show needs to change a bit. Less mockery, more genuine conversation. What do you think?" Alan smiled. It was the first real smile James had seen from him all day. "I think that sounds like growth, and growth is good." Nancy nodded in agreement. "And who would have thought Clint Eastwood would be the one to teach you that?" "Life is strange," James said. "But I'm grateful for the lesson, even if it was painful." 3 weeks later, ratings for the show were higher than ever. People were talking about the new James Corden, still funny, still energetic, but also more respectful, more genuine. The Eastwood interview had gone viral, but not for the reasons James had originally hoped. Instead, it had become a moment people pointed to as an example of how to accept criticism gracefully and learn from mistakes. And on James's desk, in a small frame, was Clint Eastwood's note. A daily reminder that sometimes the best lessons come from the places we least expect.